Everybody, it's Uncle Phil. And I just have to start out by showing you this is the view out my window in my new place where I live, Garmisch. That's Zugspitze, the uh, uh, the tallest peak in Germany of the German Alps. Amazing, beautiful, incredible. But that's my view out my window. Not half bad. Hey, everybody. Sorry, I had to cut that out because me trying to put the camera back on the stand, you would have seen a lot of my hands, probably up my nostrils. It would have been really a disastrous piece of video. So I don't like to do cuts. I like to do things in one take, but that one would have hurt your brain and your eye holes, and it just would have been bad. Anyhow, I'm really inconsistent at this, but I'm trying to figure out a way to get consistent at this. And so one of the things I thought of is I'm also trying to get consistent at reading the daily office. You know what the daily office is. It's just the way the Book of Common Prayer is broken up so you can read it every day, and they've got morning, noon, evening, all this stuff. Anyhow, I tend to read it all at one sitting over coffee because then I'm sure I like actually had time in the day. Because the one thing, by God, I will make time for most days, unless something really bizarre is happening. I will make time for sitting down and enjoying a nice cup of coffee. And so I tend to just read the whole day's worth at one sitting, which I think is cheating, but that's on brand for me, doing things the wrong way. But anyhow, I've been thinking, okay, I want to read that, right? And then I also want to do this. I want to create something. And then the truth is, if I'm being completely honest, the one thing I have consistently known how to do my whole life is look at words on a page and have some insight in what's going on and the ability to then help communicate that to people. I did it when I was a preacher, and I did it as a classroom teacher teaching literature. That's my background. So yeah, so I'm gonna kind of look at that. I've had some people who said they missed that, they missed my classes, they missed my preaching, and that's sweet of them to say. So maybe this is a way to kind of kill three birds with one stone. Anyhow, we'll see. Again, I am woefully inconsistent on this. I don't know why, because I'm sort of a compulsive person by nature. And so it seems odd that I would like this, which could be something I enjoy, that I struggle so much against it. But I think it's just insecurity and me overthinking, which is a problem. But I'm also over explaining, and I'm going to stop doing that. So, but I do like the playlist idea still, and I want to keep that going. So the playlist song today, and I'm not going to always try to be topical on this. Sometimes on the last ones I've tried to like really think, oh, this will connect to what I'm saying. This one's just because my 21-year-old daughter, she called this week, and she was telling me that she's been on a big Sting and the Police kick, which I joked, what are you, a 50-year-old man? Because see, I got to tell you a little story about this. So when I was a kid, I listened to pop music, rock music, mainly because that was on the radios. And my brothers, I have older brothers, and so they were teenagers when I was a little kid. And so I heard all their music, which is a great introduction to music. But my parents were like jazz and classical people because they were both like classically trained, and then they fell in love with jazz, when because they were born in the 30s. So in the 1950s, they were like, oh, they heard all the greats, man. They heard it all. And my dad was a trumpet player, my mom was a piano player. So they were jazz and classical, but then my brothers were listening to, rock and roll. And so as a kid, I grew up and I was like, oh, I don't listen to my parents' music. And so I was listening to that. And then I got into middle school, junior high, and I joined band. And my band director, well, it wasn't until high school, my band director, or not my band director, my private teacher, my trumpet teacher that my parents paid for graciously. He heard that there was going to be an audition for the jazz band. He was like, "You're auditioning." I was like, "I don't want to audition. I want to be in jazz band. Jazz band sucks." He's like, "You're going to audition." I was like, "I don't want to." He's like, I don't care what you want. You're going to audition. You're going to learn the piece of music. He said, whether you get in the band or not. But he said, it's a good exercise to audition, always a good exercise to audition. And number two, jazz will force you to play something you haven't been playing. And I was like, ugh. So he made me audition. And I got into the band. which I was not planning on. But I mean, I don't think it's overstating it to say that it changed my life, because I fell so deeply in love with jazz music. Oh my gosh. Deep, abiding, passionate. Wow. Can't believe it. Um, as I began to understand what was going on, I was like, this is the highest musical art form. I'm sorry. Fight me. It is the highest musical art form. Um, and so I became, in keeping with my preference to be sort of superior and elitist. I decided that I, as a 15-year-old, was only going to listen to jazz and classical music. That was it. So, of course, it delighted my parents that their third son was not sitting around listening to, rock and roll, but was instead listening to, jazz and classical. And I did that for years, up and through college. Like for 5 years, I didn't listen to anything but jazz and classical. And I mean, I went deep, deep, especially on the jazz. I already knew the classical because when I was in band, we were playing some classical pieces. So I had an appreciation for that. My mom made me take piano lessons when I was a kid. And I wish I'd stuck with them. But, I learned sort of classical method. And anyhow, all that's to say, I was like, pop rock music is for the boors, the barbarians. And then a guy, Rob Murphy, nice guy. He was like a helper at church in the youth program or whatever. But I think he was just annoyed that I was always banging on about jazz. And he had broad musical tastes. And he was like, Phil, I'm gonna make you a mixtape. I'm gonna make you a tape, not a mixtape. He made me a recording of an album, Sting's "Dream of the Blue Turtles," and he said, "I want you to listen to this." Well, of course, if you know anything about that album, Sting's "Dream of the Blue Turtles" was basically Sting with a completely jazz band. Now, they didn't play jazz per se. Um, like, there are moments you could argue, little riffs here and there, and then the song itself is kind of a jazz song, the song "Dream of the Blue Turtles." But the album, of course, pop album. Um, but it had this band on it. It had Branford Marsalis is the main thing. Branford Marsalis, whom I was already familiar with because of my love of jazz. Branford Marsalis and his pianist Kenny Kirkland, and then you had Omar Hakim on drums, and you had what's his name? What was his name on bass? Daryl Jones, who I think played with like Dizzy Gillespie's band. Like, anyhow, the band was so crazy tight. It was nuts. And that became my gateway drug back into popular music. And so I was listening to popular music again. And then, of course, from there, then I discovered like Soundgarden and everything. And then I reconnected with all the old stuff I'd listened to as a kid, which had now become classic rock, which is always off putting to hear the music of your childhood is now considered classic rock. Or the music of your 20s is considered classic rock. Anyhow, I digress. The point is, I have a soft spot in my heart for Sting and the Police because they were the thing that brought me back to enjoy not just jazz. I still think, again, jazz is the highest musical art form. And like I say, you can fight me on that one. But it did make me go, there is good stuff out there again. I'd forgotten there's some catchy stuff. So today, all that is to say, 10 minutes. Look at this. All that is to say, the song for today is "Hole in My Life" by the Police. Hole in My Life. How's that for theological? There's a hole in my life. It's such a good song, but that song is yeah, it's kind of a deep cut, semi deep cut, but it's not Roxanne. Like when you think of the Police first album, you think of Roxanne. You may not think, you probably think it's So Lonely, Next to You. Hole in My Life's probably easily the fourth or fifth song you're going to come to, but Hole in My Life is it's a good one. It's a good one. So check it out. Hole in My Life, The Police. That's your song for the playlist today. But now the Daily Office. So I printed it out on a piece of paper so I could actually read it because my devices are now occupied doing this. So when you read the Daily Office, you don't know the Daily Office, you can find it online. I use an app called Vinite. You can find it all sorts of places. You can buy a book of common prayer and try to triangulate where you're supposed to be. And anyhow, I just use a free app called Vinite that works really well. But anyhow, it's this guy, if you don't know anything about it, the way it works is you've got all these different bits that they give you to read, and they've got Psalms and they've got prayers and they've got a New Testament passage and an Old Testament passage, and they like throughout the day you'll cover different bits. But I'm not going to cover the whole thing because it'd be like forever long. But I'm going to pick the one that grabbed me today. Okay, I'm going to just pick the one that caught me, because here's the thing. I love I mean, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm obsessed with the Bible, because I grew up in a world where the right handling of the Bible was the gold standard to decide if you were basically a Christian. It wasn't, they would tell you it's faith in Jesus, but it was really, do you get Bible right? Because if you don't, it's like it invalidated your faith in Jesus. But be that as it may, I also was a literary guy. Like, I was a literature guy. So again, written word just lights me up. And so I love the passages where there's cool literary things going on, because I've begun to really see that. I think it was the, teaching English and literature for creative writing for so many years that I now look back at the Bible through a very different set of eyes, because I'm now seeing all of the literary structures. Whereas when I was just out of seminary and I was a pastor, I was reading it like, well, how do I exegete the text? That's a different skill. Everything's useful here, but this one, it's fun for me to see the literary stuff, because it turns out the Bible's kind of fun. It's kind of well written. It's kind of amazing, actually. So anyhow, the passage today is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. The bit that was in there today was verses 11 through 26. And sometimes, I'll be honest, maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but sometimes their cuts, the way they cut up the passages, seems very counterintuitive to me. But today, I feel like they kind of nailed it. So yeah, it's sort of several bits here. So it says, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him, testing him, and they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. Now, right off the bat, this is ironically funny, because this is just on the heels of multiple miracles, like big and small. We have feeding thousands of people miraculously, to healing a person who couldn't hear or speak, to curing a woman. But like, there have been miracles coming out their ears just literally in the verses leading up to this. It's just miracle, 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 miracle. That's hard to say multiple times. And then they go, we want a miracle. We want a sign. And I stinking love this, that it's like, and you see this, when you don't get the sign you want, it's really not an issue of wanting a sign. It's, I want a different answer than what I'm being told. I want a different indication than what I'm getting. Like, you remember Gideon in the Old Testament, where Gideon's like, okay, I need to know it's really, you want me to do this. So I have this fleece, and I want the fleece wet and the ground dry. And then God does it. And he's like, shoot. That means I have to go. I'm sorry. Did I say fleece wet? Can we do fleece dry ground wet? And God does that one again. He's like, shoot, like, like, it's just an issue that Gideon didn't want to go. And the same thing's happening here. They're like, we want a sign. And I love that Jesus doesn't even go, I'm not going to give you a sign. He knows what they want. They want him to do something to further validate that he's God. And the big issue isn't that they want a sign. They want him not to be God. They don't want him to be God. These people did not want him to be God for a variety of reasons, for which I'll touch on here in a second, right? So it says they showed up and they wanted him, they tested him, demanded he show a miraculous sign. And he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit. And I love that too, man. He doesn't scream at him. I mean, Jesus can get upset. In other places, he chases people with whips. So let's be clear. Jesus can lose his patience. But in this one, it says he sighed deeply in his spirit. I'm so tired. I'm so disappointed. I'm so frustrated. You guys are wearing me out, man. wearing me out. He says, why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I'm not going to give this generation any such sign. You know, I mean, think about it. This is the same thing that the devil did with Jesus in the wilderness when he tempted him. He's like, I mean, nobody knows Jesus is God more than the devil, right? Like, because if Jesus is co-eternal with God, if he's the second member of the Trinity, that means he was existing in some pre-incarnate form when Lucifer was doing his thing, rebelling. Like, if you understand biblical history, you get the idea when he's like, why don't you turn these stones into bread or jump off this building, or like, it's he does nobody needs a sign less than the devil that Jesus is God. And yet when he asks him, the whole point is to basically, it's an inverted way of saying, I don't accept you for who you are. I reject you. I don't want you to be you. That's really what's going on. That's really the thing. Like, it's always just, I don't like the answer I'm being given, so I'll ask again. And when I was a teacher, I saw the students all the time. They didn't, they'd ask, well, what about this? And I'd say, here's what you got to do. And they, yeah, but could I? I'm like, no, I've asked and answered. Like, no, you can't change the assignment. You turn it in the way I asked. Yeah, but what if I, no, 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 no. I've given my answer. So we're done. We're done with that. So he says, I'm not going to give you anything else. So he got back in the boat, left them, crossed the other side. All right, now this is the second bit. He says, Mark says, the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. Okay, which is funny because they've just left baskets and baskets of extra food after Jesus' thing, but they forgot to bring it. They had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat. One loaf of bread with them. And as they're crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, watch out, beware the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. All right, now you may be going, okay, the yeast of the Pharisees. So he's just talked to the Pharisees, and their problem is, and so it says yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. So first of all, yeast. If you know anything about yeast, okay, like I've made some bread. I've also eaten some bread, but I've made some bread. And if the thing, the idea is you put your flour and your water and your yeast in there, maybe a little honey, a little salt, and get things going. And the point is that this little tiny spoonful of yeast has this outsize effect and completely changes the way this other stuff interacts, completely changes its size and its relationship to the environment and what it becomes. It becomes something different because of this little packet of yeast. And so this idea of yeast or a leavening agent to literally structurally and chemically change something. He says, beware the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. And Herod, in this case, Herod Antipas, he's thrown in here. And I think he's just another example of somebody who he was, because he was fascinated with Jesus, but he was like, he's probably just John the Baptist come back from the dead, right? Like, yeah, like everybody was fascinated with Jesus. The problem is he was claiming to be God. And that really messed with some people's heads. They were like, nah, I don't like that. And so if what the Pharisees and Herod Antipas have in common is that they both had a good thing going in terms of their relationship to their societies. Herod represented sort of imperial authority, and the Pharisees represented sort of cultural and religious authority. And so Jesus was coming and saying, first of all, your authority doesn't really ultimately eternally matter to God. It's because you're basing it on all the wrong things. And number two, my kingdom is one that's not about domination and authority and control, right? Like Jesus shows up and says, turn the other cheek, the meek shall inherit the earth, like the blessed are the poor, blessed are, those who mourn. This is not what people want to hear. They want to hear, how do I kill, man? How do I life max? How do I like be my best self? How do I make life amazing? Because that's what you want. You want to win. You want to have the best, most amazing life. And Jesus is showing up going, you might get slapped in the face. Go ahead and take it a second time. Like, nobody wants to hear that. But that's the whole thing, is Jesus' whole message. And so part of what makes him historically unique, he's kind of the only guy who shows up and says, the way you make yourself more like what God wants you to be is by not trying to dominate everybody else in the world. Your selflessness is kind of the thing. Yeah, well, when you're in charge, in Herod's case, politically, and in the Pharisees' case, sort of culturally in that religious society, when you're in charge, you don't want to give that up. And Jesus was threatening that. So when he says, well, and the way he was threatening that, go back to the sign. This is how well this is written. What were they asking for? We want a sign. Like it's as if they're saying, I'll accept you as God if you do something else, right? So again, it's a rejection of him as God. And so the leaven of the Pharisees is and Herod is to go, yeah, I don't think you're God. I don't think you get to say that to me. So beware the leaven of the Pharisees, beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And Herod is going, beware of going, yeah, I don't think, Jesus, you're all you're cracked up to be. And he says this to his disciples. Now, why would it start? Think again, think like literature class in the 10th grade. Why would you start with, they forgot to bring food? They had one loaf of bread. What had Jesus just done before this? Turned a little bit of bread into food for thousands. So if they're sitting around, okay, and they go, oh, shoot, we have one loaf of bread. We got 12 dudes and Jesus, 13. That's not going to go very far. And Jesus goes, hey, watch out. Now, beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And Herod works on so many levels, because it works on the level of, this grand, put God where he belongs. You need to follow my way, not the other ways that are offered to you. But it also comes down granularly to this argument over bread, because the idea here is, if you remember that I'm who I say I am, if you remember that I'm God, the bread thing's not going to really be an issue. Heck, if you just remember what I did an hour ago or yesterday or whenever it was, if you can just remember that, then guess what? Guess what? Everything's going to be put in its place. So they're at this crossroads of, they could go, oh yeah, we've seen him twice feed thousands of people miraculously with a very tiny amount of food. So probably 13's not going to be a push for him. They could do that. That would be the smart move. What do? At this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. I'm probably going to owe, like, in eternity, when I bump into, the disciples, I'm going to probably owe them an apology for cracking wise about them so much. And I'll say this, I'm no better than they are. Because I can't remember from minute to minute how gracious and good God is to me. I'm always worrying about the next thing. I am always doubting. It's just constant in my life. But what's interesting to me is, these guys literally are sitting in a boat with Jesus. They're in the boat, and he goes, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And they go, okay. What about lunch, dude? We were screwed on lunch. We've got like in one ear and out your mother. Like these guys, like, just nobody does blockhead better than the disciples, man. Nobody does. Jesus knew what they were saying. He said, why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? Now remember that line. This is called foreshadowing. Again, go back to 10th grade English. Foreshadowing. You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Do you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterwards? 12, they said. You can hear the tone. 12. They're staring at their shoes. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. Don't. I'm sorry. I find it funny. I feel like anybody who's ever maybe been a teacher, had children, you name it, then this hits a very close to home. And then there's this thing, and this has always kind of puzzled me, but like I say, it's finally hit me today after years of teaching literature that I think I get what's going on here literarily in terms of the structure. Because the very next thing is this healing of a blind man. And it isn't that there's a healing of a blind man, because that's the thing, is Jesus healing all the time. It's how he heals it that's always bugged me. So they arrive at Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to Jesus and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the village. Then, okay, and here's where it gets freaky. Spitting on the man's eyes. That's kind of gangster. I don't know why, again, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said. "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Okay, so you got this weirdo miracle with Jesus spitting on a guy's eyes, right? And then, okay, he spits on him. And the guy goes, "I can kind of see now." Like Jesus says, "Can you see?" Now remember, he had just asked the disciples, "Can you see? Can't you see yet?" All right. So I don't really know the spit thing. I'm gonna like the spit thing. I'm gonna just say maybe it's somehow a sort of a parallel to the fact that he's, as my kids used to say, spitting bars. He's giving them all this information. He is literally constantly putting out of his mouth the truth about himself, about the kingdom, about everything. And people don't get it. So maybe that's the best I got on the spit. But the fact that it takes two stages. So like, here's the thing. If based on what we believe about power, like, it's weird that this would be like Jesus having an off day or being like, "Whoa, this is hard," because he heals blind people other times, and he does all sorts of healings that are just as, sort of biologically complicated. Heck, when he raises Lazarus from the dead, he doesn't have to go, "Boy, it took me 3 tries on that one." Like, fixed eyes is that's one he does, between, breakfast and lunch, over a cup of coffee. Like, Jesus does this kind of stuff all the time. So why in the world would it take twice? I think it's because there's a yet another point being made back to the disciples who are sitting there watching this, and it's this idea of this revelation, and you're not getting it right. Like, so you start with the Pharisees. We want a sign. They've just had a sign. If they want to, they can believe, and we know that from John 3, because Nicodemus shows up at night and says, we know you're sent from God. Like, he's one of the Pharisees, and he goes, yeah, definitely. Like, this is, again, it's not an issue, but it's this idea that I can say it as many times as you want. I can do miracles. You're going to have to open your eyes. Like, it's apparently going to take some time. And I appreciate this, because he doesn't look at the guy after the first round when the guy says, "Yeah, I see things, but they look like trees." And he goes, "Well, I guess that's all the faith you've got, is tree level sight. So too bad, bucko. You're just going to have to be blurry the rest of your life." No, he touches him again. And then it's clear. When the disciples go, "Let's argue over bread," and he goes, "I really wouldn't argue over bread if I were you." And they go, "Let's argue over bread." He doesn't go, "You know what? I'm just going to turn you all into like armadillos," or he doesn't just like do this like force push out of the bone. I'm always equating Jesus with Jedi mind powers, which is probably completely inappropriate. But I kind of wish he would have done that sometimes, like, just like shot them out of the boat into the water. Like, he doesn't do that stuff. He sighs deeply in his spirit. You got to remember, like, he's coming to save the world. He's not coming to make people feel terrible. He's not coming to ruin your life. He's coming to save the world. So when he does this stuff, it's not to make you miserable. And so he wants nothing more than for the people around to get it. That's what he wants. I want you to get it. I want you to get it because what I'm bringing is something good. And yet, man, it's you get hard-headed. And I think it's because the fact is, again, what he offers is a counterintuitive reality to the life that we're offered by everything else. Most everything I can think of offers a life of control and winning. That's the ultimate you can hope for is promotion, self-promotion, others promoting you, increasing your whatever, your standing, your wealth, your accomplishments. It's about it's about me winning and it's about me controlling my world. And what Jesus is offering is, you know what? You don't need any of that because I can show you my grace and my love so your accomplishments are not the thing that are going to get you anywhere. And that should be liberating, but I think it's terrifying. It's like people who've been in captivity so long and then someone comes to rescue them and they try to run back in. They don't want to come out. They're afraid to walk out. Even though their rescuers have shown up. This has happened before in rescue situations after long-term sort of psychological torture and things, but it's kind of like that. I don't want to come out and do what you're saying because even though it'd be liberating, it's terrifying. Heck, it's Plato's allegory of the cave. You can show me the truth, show me the sun, and I go, no, 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 I think I want to go back in the cave. So anyhow, I just love it finally it kind of clicked for me why he healed in two stages. And it's to continue to make the point. I'm going to keep showing you this. And maybe if I show you enough times, you'll see it. Maybe. Anyhow, that's the bit from Mark in today's readings, and hopefully I'll get this video actually sent out today for today's readings. And yeah, and your song is "Hole in My Life" by The Police. And so I just want to finish by reminding you that this is the Jesus is about good news of great joy for all people. If what you hear about Jesus doesn't point to good news of great joy for all people, then it needs to be examined closely. Because if that's not what it's producing, something went off the rails, right? Something went wrong. So absolutely bear that in mind. And remember, because the good news and great joy. By the way, the good news and great joy, it for all people, doesn't mean that everything's okay and that you're just fine the way you are, and that there's no such thing as right and wrong. It just means that God's love and grace transcend all of that. You and I may be disasters. I am a disaster most days, but the good news is God's grace and love transcends that and can redeem that. So just understand that that's the good news of great joy for all people, available to all. Okay? That's the great thing to hear. So just remember that God loves you. God offers his grace. It's fantastic. And as for Uncle Phil, I wish grace, peace, and love to everyone.